He thought he was making an example of someone. That was the part nobody talked about afterward. Not the jet, not the engine, not even the money. What people forgot was that Harmon Delacroix walked into that marina at 7:14 in the morning specifically looking for someone to humiliate. He just didn't expect it to go the way it did. The boat had been sitting dead in slip 22 for 11 days. Not a small boat, a 94-foot Sunseeker Predator, the kind with twin-man diesel engines that cost more than most people's houses. The kind that gets featured in magazines with the word superyacht in the headline, and even those superyacht guys would laugh at calling it that. It was Harmon's third boat and his favorite, and it hadn't moved since the morning of April 3rd when both engines shut down simultaneously at 100 RPM and refused to restart. 11 days, 4 separate marine mechanics, 2 certified Sunseeker technicians flown in from Fort Lauderdale, 1 independent diesel specialist who charged $400 an hour and spent 6 hours aboard before quietly refunding half his fee and driving away without explanation. Nobody could find what was wrong. The marina at Bay Seaside Harbor wasn't the kind of place where things went wrong without getting fixed quickly. It was the kind of marina with a private gate code and a waiting list for slips, and a dockmaster named Felix who wore a pressed polo shirt every single day and spoke to owners with the careful deference of a man who understood that his job existed only as long as the right people wanted it to. The Bayside crowd did not tolerate inconvenience. They fixed things. They threw money at problems until the problems went away. This one hadn't gone away. So when Harmon Delacroix arrived that Tuesday morning in his Range Rover with a 4th mechanic lined up, this one from a shop in Annapolis, that a friend on the racing circuit had recommended, he was already in the kind of mood that makes people in surface industries very quiet and very careful. The mechanic he'd called was supposed to meet him at 7:30. What Harmon found instead, sitting on the dock railing outside slip 22 with a paper coffee cup and a yellow notepad, was a man who looked like he'd slept outside. Not metaphorically. The man's jacket was a faded Carhartt with a frayed left cuff. His boots were steel-toed and old, the kind that had been resoled at least once. There was a tear in the knee of his jeans that was not the decorative kind. He was maybe 42, maybe 48, the kind of age that was hard to read on someone who'd spent a lot of time outdoors. He had a 2-day beard that had nothing to do with fashion. He was writing something on the notepad. He was writing about the boat. Harmon stopped walking. "Can I help you?" It wasn't really a question. The man looked up. He had dark eyes, unhurried. "That the Sunseeker in 22? It is. And this is a private dock." "I know. Felix let me through, said you were having engine trouble." He looked back at the boat. "Both engines or just one?" Harmon stared at him. "Who are you?" "My name's Ray Maddox." He said it the way you say your name when you've had to explain yourself a lot. Simple, not apologetic. "I do marine diesel work. Independent. I heard you've had some people out here who couldn't figure it out. I have a mechanic coming." "The guy from Annapolis?" Ray Maddox nodded slightly. "He's good. He'll probably get there eventually." He paused. "But I can tell you what's wrong right now." There was a beat of silence. A seagull landed on the piling at the end of the slip and immediately left. Harmon Delacroix had built 3 companies from nothing and sold 2 of them. He had a very accurate sense of when someone was wasting his time. He looked at this man, the jacket, the boots, the notepad, and his first instinct was to call Felix and have him removed. His second instinct was the same. "You've never been aboard. No. You've never looked at the engines. Not yet. But you can tell me what's wrong." Ray Maddox turned the notepad around. On it was a hand-drawn diagram, not sloppy, actually precise, with labeled components and a circled section near what appeared to be a fuel return line. MAN V12s on a 2019 Predator have a known issue with the secondary fuel pressure sensor. It's a software conflict, not a mechanical failure. The sensor sends a false low-pressure signal at certain RPM thresholds. Both engines read it simultaneously because they're on the same CECU loop. The system shuts them down as a precaution. He set the notepad on his knee. The sensor itself is usually fine. The fix is a firmware update and a manual override on the return line pressure setting. Takes about 2 hours. Harmon looked at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not a small laugh. The kind that carries. 2 dock workers 30 feet away glanced over. Felix, who had appeared at the gate with his pressed polo and his careful expression, went very still. "You're telling me," Harmon said, "that 4 certified mechanics missed a firmware update. The Annapolis guy would have found it. Might have taken him a day, maybe 2. The Sunseeker techs should have known. It was in a service bulletin in 2022. But those don't always make it to every shop." Ray Maddox picked up his coffee cup. "The independent diesel guy. I don't know what he was looking for, but it wasn't this. And you figured all this out from a notepad on my dock, from knowing the platform and thinking about what was consistent with the symptom." A pause. "Both engines, same RPM, no warning before shutdown. That's not mechanical. That's software." Harmon pulled out his phone. He had people for things like this. People who vetted other people who checked credentials, people who made sure that the humans he allowed into proximity with his assets were qualified to be there. He called his assistant. He described Ray Maddox. He asked for a background check. He did this in front of Ray Maddox, loudly enough to be heard, which was intentional. Ray Maddox drank his coffee and waited. The background check came back in 4 minutes. Harmon's assistant was efficient. Ray Maddox, formerly employed by Coastal Marine Services in Charleston for 11 years, engine specialist, left the company 18 months ago under circumstances that the assistant described as financial dispute, no litigation. Current address listed as a P.O. box. No active business license. One prior address, an apartment complex in North Charleston that, when cross-referenced, was described on its own Google reviews as technically habitable. Harmon lowered his phone. He looked at this clearly broke, clearly homeless, or near enough, clearly nobody, and he made a decision. "All right," he said. "Let's say you're right." Ray Maddox waited. "Walk me through it, right now, in front of my dock crew and Felix. You tell me exactly what's wrong and exactly how to fix it, step by step, and I'll have one of my guys do it while you supervise. If it works, I'll pay you $500. Felix had gone rigid at the gate. Ray Maddox was quiet for a moment, just a moment. $500. That's a fair day rate for a day's labor, sure. Another pause. You've already paid more than that in failed diagnoses, and none of them worked. So the market rate for this particular problem has been established at 0. It was a cruel thing to say. Harmon knew it was cruel when he said it. He had a talent for that, for finding the precise weight and placement of a thing that would make someone feel small. It was a skill he had not spent any energy trying to unlearn. Ray Maddox looked at him steadily. "I'll tell you what, let me go aboard, verify what I think, and then we'll talk about the number. We'll talk about the number, now. 500 is what you'd pay someone to change your oil." "Ah, yes," Harmon said. "That's the offer." Behind him, he heard one of the dock workers, a young guy named Cole who'd worked at Bayside for maybe 8 months, and who Harmon had spoken to exactly twice, make a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cough. Harmon didn't turn around. Ray Maddox stood up from the railing. He was taller than Harmon had registered. He tucked the notepad into his jacket. "I'm going to pass," he said. "Good luck with your boat." He started walking. This was the moment, and people who were there would later disagree about exactly what happened in Harmon's face. But Felix said there was something that flashed through it, something that was not quite panic, but was adjacent to it, because the man was walking away. And the boat was still broken, and the Annapolis mechanic, Harmon's assistant, had just texted, had a family emergency and was canceling. "Maddox." Ray stopped. He didn't turn immediately. "What's your actual number?" Now he turned. 2,000. Diagnostic and repair. Parts extra, if any are needed, which they probably won't be. 1,500. 2,000. Harmon had not had someone refuse to negotiate with him in a very long time. It produced a sensation he recognized from his 20s, a kind of tightening behind the sternum that he'd spent decades training himself not to show. "Fine," he said. What happened over the next 3 hours was the kind of thing that becomes a story. Not because anything dramatic occurred. It was actually, as Ray Maddox had predicted, mostly quiet, but because of the quality of the silence. Ray Maddox went aboard. He pulled an engine access panel that the Sunseeker technicians had opened, but apparently not examined with the right question in mind. He connected a diagnostic tablet, older model, third-party software, the kind of setup that suggested someone who knew the tools well enough to not need the expensive ones. He ran a read on the ECU. He showed Harmon the screen. The secondary fuel pressure sensor was logging a ghost signal. It had been doing it, according to the log, since January. 3 months of a silent fault code that nobody had looked at, because it wasn't producing an obvious symptom. Until the temperature differential on that particular morning in April had pushed the RPM to the precise threshold where the ECU's safety protocol kicked in. Felix was standing at the stern by then. The 2 dock workers had found reasons to be nearby. The young one, Cole, was sitting on a cooler pretending to inventory something and watching every move. Ray Maddox updated the firmware from a file on his tablet. He had it already downloaded, which meant he'd prepared for this before arriving, which meant he'd thought through the diagnosis before he ever sat down on that railing, and then manually adjusted the pressure override setting by 12 psi. He closed the access panel. He started both engines. They ran. Not rough, not tentative. They ran the way they were supposed to run. A low, clean thrum that Harmon could feel through the deck, a sound he hadn't heard in 11 days. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Cole said, under his breath, "There it is." Harmon was standing at the helm station. He kept his face still. He was very good at keeping his face still. Ray Maddox came up from below. He wiped his hands on a cloth from his jacket pocket. He looked at Harmon. "You'll want to run it for about 20 minutes before you take it out," he said. "And get the sensor physically replaced at your next service. The override holds, but the underlying hardware is degraded." Harmon nodded. "I'll get you an invoice. My assistant will take care of payment." Ray Maddox nodded. He picked up his tablet and his notepad and his coffee cup, still there now cold, and he moved toward the gangway. "Maddox." Ray turned. Harmon was quiet for a moment. The engines were still running. Silsa still running. The sound of them filled the slip. "Merchant Marine." 15 years. Then the shop. A slight pause. "Commercial diesels aren't that different from these, just bigger. Most problems are the same problems, Merchant Marine." Harmon repeated it. "So why are you?" He stopped himself. Ray Maddox waited to see if he'd finish. He didn't. "Right," Ray said, and he walked off the boat. What Harmon didn't say, and what Ray Maddox did not explain, and what only became clear later, to Harmon, to Felix, to Cole the dock worker, who looked it up that evening because he couldn't stop thinking about it, was this. Ray Maddox had left Coastal Marine Services 18 months ago because the company's owners had been slow-paying contractors for 2 years, siphoning cash to cover a real estate investment that went wrong. And when Ray had escalated it to the State Labor Board, the owner had responded by telling every Marine outfit in the Charleston network that Maddox was a liability, blacklisted. Not for cause, for the specific offense of having been right about something a more powerful person wanted, kept quiet. He'd been doing day labor since then. Construction, sometimes. Warehouse work in the winter. Living out of a room in a boarding house in North Charleston. Because he had a teenager back home in Beaufort he was still paying support for, and the math did not leave room for much else. He had not done marine work in 18 months. He had read about Harmon's boat problem in a forum. Marina gossip traveled in specific circles, and he had driven 90 minutes to sit on that dock and offer to fix it for a number that was, genuinely, less than half what it was worth. Because he needed the work and also, and this was the part that didn't make the math sheet but was true anyway, because he was very good at this, and he was tired of not being allowed to do it. Harmon's assistant processed the payment that afternoon. $2,000, as agreed. 2 days later, Cole, who had mentioned the incident to his girlfriend, who mentioned it to her brother, who worked in the marina's management office. sent Ray Maddox a message through the Bayside Harbor contact form. It wasn't from Harmon. It wasn't official. It was just Cole, writing in the kind of run-on sentences people use when they're not trying to sound professional, saying that he thought what he'd seen was something, and that there was a guy he knew with a sport fisher with a similar issue, and would Ray be open to taking a look? Ray wrote back the same day. That thread, Cole's message, Ray's response, eventually led to a word-of-mouth chain that over the following 6 months brought Ray Maddox 11 clients at Bayside and 2 referrals from a boatyard in Hilton Head. He got his South Carolina marine contractor's license reinstated in September. He took on an apprentice, a kid from the technical college in Charleston who reminded him a little of himself at 23, which was not entirely comfortable but was productive. He did not tell any of his new clients about the morning with Harmon Delacroix unless they asked. Some of them asked. Harmon, for his part, did not offer a better number when he called Ray back 6 weeks later about a raw water pump on the same boat. He offered the same rate as before, which was still low, and Ray Maddox accepted, which told you something about where Ray still was at that particular moment. But Ray also quoted his labor at a full day rate, and Harmon, without making a production of it, paid it. That was the closest thing to an apology that passed between them. Whether it was enough is something each person in that marina probably answers differently, and honestly, there was room to argue it both ways. Cole thought it wasn't. Felix thought it was practical, which wasn't the same as enough but was sometimes what you got. The dock worker who'd been there that first morning said later that he'd never forgotten the sound of those engines starting after 11 days of silence, and that whatever happened after didn't change the feeling of that moment. Ray Maddox fixed boats. He was extremely good at it. He'd always been extremely good at it. For a stretch of time, because of a set of circumstances that had nothing to do with his skill and everything to do with the specific way the world treats people who escalate problems that more powerful people find inconvenient, nobody had let him prove it. Then someone laughed at him on a dock in South Carolina, and the engines ran. Here is the question, the real one. If you had been standing at the stern of that boat on that Tuesday morning, not as Harmon, not as Felix, but just as someone watching, at what point would you have handed Ray Maddox the diagnostic cable when he showed you the diagram? When the Annapolis mechanic canceled? When the engines had already been dead for 11 days? Or would you have needed to hear them run first?